for joining us for the Family Business Center's webinar, What Family Members Need to Know. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. I wanted to bring your attention to the dialog box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. This is your mechanism to ask questions throughout the webinar. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can during our question and answer session at the end, but you can type your questions in throughout the course of the webinar, and our team will capture them, and then we'll go through them one by one at the end of the webinar. In the next hour, we're going to explore the important things that go into creating a responsible ownership group. We're going to start with a brief introduction, talking a little bit about why this is important. We'll discuss what family members need to know and talk about some of the ways in which family members can learn these things. There are a variety of different mechanisms. There's not just one solution. So we'll look at all of those solutions as we explore the topic. So this topic is near and dear to my heart, and some of you know this story, but I'll share it with you again. In August of 1992, my father was critically ill with lung cancer, and for about the 4 months previous to that date, my brothers and I had been spending most of our days going to work and then going to the hospital. And on August 6th at about 9, I was getting ready to leave the hospital, and both my brothers had just left. And as I was preparing to leave, my dad asked me to stay a little bit longer, and he said that he had something to tell me. And that night he proceeded to tell me that he was passing all of the ownership in his family business to me and not splitting it between me and my brothers. Now, I'm the middle of 3 brothers, and my first reaction was, we have a family business? You know, my dad had spent much of his life trying to insulate me from the family business. So the next day I woke up and was a newly minted family business owner, and you know, had little or no preparation at all for what being an owner meant, how to interact with his cousins, how to make decisions about the businesses that we were in. And you know, with him dying that evening, so he died that evening after I left, I kind of woke up with all of these questions and no one there to really talk to about this. So given no preparation for the responsibilities of ownership and no sense of connection to the business, you know, I really didn't have any relationship that would be helpful in as an owner. So this is one of the reasons I'm pretty passionate about this topic. So when somebody starts a business from scratch, you know, you have a choice of choosing your business partners. In your family business, you most often get shares passed down through the generations as an inheritance. So as the family grows, you know, some family members choose to work for the business, others choose to work outside the business, and we get married and in-laws and have kids, and the complexity of the family business system grows. You know, these important stakeholders to the family business process often end up with a very different relationship to the business than those that really started the business. So it's important to think about educating those folks as we go along so that they can be productive contributors, because what happens oftentimes is that the sense of responsibility and connection that family members have to the business changes. You know, the creators and builders of the family business have an inherent sense of responsibility for the business because it's their baby, whereas the later generations and members of the family business always don't have that same connection to what's been built by the family. So in order to build that sense of responsibility and connection and prevent you know, the sense of entitlement of involvement of family members just as a purely financial proposition, we need to really bring family members along as potential owners and contributors to our family governance process on a number of important topics so that we can build an active and engaged ownership group. And really the process to do this is education. We're going to talk a little bit about the education gap that exists in a lot of families. So next slide, please. If we don't educate family members, what we end up with is a growing tension between those who are working for the family business and those who don't work for the family business. when this tension exists in a family, we hear from the people working for the business that they feel as if their hard work isn't appreciated, that all the shareholders want is money, that they're underpaid. So there's this kind of growing sense of resentment from the people working for the business, of the owners who, to be dramatic about it, they might say are kind of blood-sucking pigs. That's the dramatic kind of negative take on it that some people have in the emotional moment. And the flip side of that is the shareholders outside the business oftentimes feel like those working for the business are getting significant perks, that there's often little or no payout to the shareholders, and the family members working for the business are often getting the better part of the deal. So what you see is this kind of division that often grows in the family between those working for the business and those not working for the business. And really, this sense of this gap is really an education gap in kind of understanding the roles that people play, the difference between ownership and management, and how to make sure that the shareholders are productive contributors and supporters of the business, and that the business has a healthy sense of responsibility to its shareholders across time. But this takes energy, education, and work over time. These education gaps aren't filled overnight. It's really, if you want to use the metaphor of working out, if you're a few pounds overweight, you're not going to drop all that weight in one workout session. What you need to do is build a healthy practice of exercise. So in the context of family business, we need to have a healthy process of education and engagement and communication with our shareholder and ownership groups. Because if we don't, these tensions often between the family members often explode at critical points in the life of a family business. Sometimes it's when the founder passes. Sometimes it's when the business circumstances require a lot of investment to meet the strategic challenges, or when the family's desire for payout conflicts with the business or need for capital to grow. Sometimes it happens when family members need a job, when business returns are poor. All of these are typical tension points that families face, where these divisions in the family start to leak out and create tension. But we found that much of this tension that's built up in these situations comes from a variety of things. Next slide, please. The tension often comes from the lack of a governance structure to guide and focus the conversation, so that we just rely on normal family communication patterns, which often are driven by emotion rather than productive discussion, and that lack of a governance structure to guide and focus our conversations makes the tension increase rather than decrease. The education gap that I mentioned earlier, where we don't fully understand what the role of an owner is and the rights of being an owner, and the people working for the business don't necessarily think about their shareholders as investors in the business, and that they have rights and responsibilities as investors in the business. And then, of course, we always have unresolved family issues from the past. Sometimes they're individual conflicts, sometimes they're family patterns such as alcoholism or how we conflict. But all of those things can contribute to this kind of growing tension in the family and in the business. Next slide, please. So the first step is that family members really need to understand what do the best family businesses do that separate them from the rest. So this is coming from some meta-research studies that have looked at what are the things that are always correlated with successful transition in family businesses. And really that comes down to governance. When you talk about family business, a lot of people will primarily focus on succession planning, and that's really a catch-all to describe whatever the problem of the day is in the context of the family. And really what the research shows is that succession planning doesn't have any correlation with successful transition in family businesses. The three things that we see on the screen right now are the things that always go into successful transition, and that is regular family meetings, so having a process for family communication and governance and decision making that allows the family to make good decisions, that we have a business governance structure, a board of directors that helps us hold management accountable and continue to grow and improve the business across time. And then we have ownership governance and strategic planning that's looking at the future, building the value of shareholders across time. So family meetings, boards of directors, and strategic planning are the key elements that shareholders really need to understand, and that these are the three things that go into success across time as a family business, because these are the three things that help you, the three processes that help you answer the incredible number of questions that you end up facing and keeping the family unified moving forward as a group about what their goals and objectives are and how they seek to achieve those goals and objectives. Next slide, please. So emerging research really shows us that family cohesion is one of the long-term indicators of family business success. And so the research that looked at families that have survived for over 200 years finds that there are really 4 aspects to family cohesion that are always present in families that survive for long periods of time. Family emotional cohesion, business emotional cohesion, family financial cohesion, and business financial cohesion. So these don't exist in isolation. They influence each other, and it's really an engine that you need all 4 components at different times in the life of a family business. So the family emotional is the basic family relationships that we have with each other, and as a family grows and develops across time, the complexity of that family grows. So maintaining that sense of family attachment and allowing that to grow and evolve as the family grows and evolves is a real challenge at times. The business emotional connection is the pride and the sense of identity and social status that we get from being part of a family business. It's the power of what our family business can do in the community, what it means to our employees, our sense of pride in terms of the brand name and what our business contributes to the world. Family financial is bonding related to the satisfaction of the financial needs of family members. So when family members use their financial resources to help each other, that's an example of that kind of family financial cohesion. So some of you might have received a gift from your parents to put a down payment on a house. That would be an example of that kind of family financial cohesion. That can build that sense of unity. We're part of something bigger than ourselves. Sometimes it's using the financial resources of the family to support the philanthropic causes of family members. That can build a sense of unity. And business financial is probably the easiest to understand, and that's really, in order to be successful across generations as a family, our business has to be a success, and we need to make sure that we're attending to that. The interesting thing about this research is that really it showed that the family financial and business financial components can only keep a family unified for short periods of time. That money is important. It's a part of the system. We have to have conversations around it, and we have to use it judiciously and manage it effectively in order to be successful across time. But the things that keep a family connected for extended periods of time are family emotional attachment and business emotional attachment. So it's our basic family relationships and the sense of pride we have in the business that keep us connected and committed to a common future together across time. So if you go back to my original comment, when you start a business, you get to choose who your business partners are. In a family business, you inherit your business partners. We have to be more intentional about how we build that sense of connection and attachment as a family, and we have to be intentional about building pride in what we do as a family if we are seeking to preserve our business, or for those who sometimes sell businesses, how we protect our family wealth and what we do with our family wealth. What is the core purpose of our family wealth? So all of that's to say, if you can go to the next slide, please, that we need to have a family strategy to create this sense of unity, this sense of cohesion, this sense of common purpose that leads to a sense of direction moving forward and what we want to accomplish together. And if it's just about the money, why not just invest in stocks, develop a diversified portfolio, and call it a day? What we know from research is that there's a limit to how fast you can grow wealth when you're talking about a diversified portfolio, because a diversified portfolio is managing risk at a higher level. And we often don't have those emotional connections as family members that we often do when we're focused on an operating business or multiple operating businesses. So having a family strategy that helps us define our values and our culture, what makes us special as a family, what binds us together other than money, and what we want to accomplish with that capital. What is the mission of what we're trying to do? What's the impact that we want our family to have, and our vision for success? So if we were to look 5 or 10 years down the line, how would we define our success as a family? If we were to look back over the last 10 or 20 years, what are the indicators of the success or failure of our family? We often don't think that overtly about family and thinking about defining success as a family. So often we kind of meander as a family rather than owning that definition of success and creating strategies to achieve that level of success. So a family strategy will help clearly define the family's values and the culture and relationships that emanate from that values. It will help define the mission of the family and vision for the family of what are we trying to accomplish, what's the impact we want to have in the world, and what's our vision for how we're going to have that impact. And then the strategies and tactics are the nuts and bolts of the strategy of how are we going to achieve that mission and vision. Next slide, please. All of this is just to say that family business, as I'm sure all of you know, is about more than just money and financial capital. It's about the relationships. One family said that our family assets are the things that are on our balance sheet, the real estate that we own, all of that. But our family wealth is in our relationships, what our business and our finances allow us to do for the community. It's our values. It's what we mean to our church, our community, etc. I think that's really encapsulates the idea that family business is about more than just money. And the more unified we are as a family about how we want to deploy those resources and how we want to grow those resources, both the financial resources as well as the human capital resources of the family, the clearer we are about that with our family strategy, the clearer we are about our family values, our vision for what we're trying to accomplish and the mission of what we're trying to accomplish, then it helps to really give direction when we start talking about things like conflict resolution and communication. And when it talks about governance and decision making, if we're clear about our values and what we're trying to accomplish, it often informs the governance structures that we'll create. A lot of times we jump to structure because it makes us feel better about life. It reduces our anxiety to have structure, but sometimes the hard work has to be done ahead of time, which is defining the family values, the family mission and vision of what we're trying to do together and build that sense of unity to be successful across time. So the family values, the mission, the vision really should inform how we resolve conflict, how we structure our governance, how we educate our shareholders and build leaders and manage our wealth, and ultimately flowing into our business strategy or our enterprise strategy. And all of these are really elements that shareholders need to have an understanding of in order to be fully productive contributors. And one of the challenges is to this, again, it's building a practice of understanding and not thinking that I'm going to go to one seminar or listen to one webinar and all of my issues are going to be solved. It's about developing that strategy for shareholder education and leadership development that's going to create the shareholder group that we want and need moving forward. Next slide, please. So we need to look at educating our family members so that they understand that family excellence involves, that pursuing family excellence involves defining our values and our culture. And if we have already defined values and culture, how does the next generation influence them? So in one family that I've worked with, the issue was we are an extremely conservative Christian family in the second generation, and that is reflected in our values, our culture, our mission statement, etc. How do we shift to the third generation where there may be more diversity in religious thought, and how do we still agree on a kind of common sense of values and a culture that we want to create? It's not an easy question and not one that's solved overnight, but families that pursue family excellence define those values and culture and continually have conversations about how that needs to grow to involve and engage the next generation. Families who pursue family excellence pursue communication and conflict resolution. They set clear expectations of each other about the role of a manager versus the role of an owner, and our family roles versus our business roles, etc. That they pursue a sense of differentiation, that they, to simplify this, it's really a sense of developing a sense of self-confidence separate and apart from our family so that we can disagree in a healthy way. We can have conversations that are driven by content and meaning rather than emotion. And governance, and of course governance is also important on the ownership side. And families that are successful and pursue ownership excellence also work to enculturate their family members to understand what ownership is and the role of an owner. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the things that we think that owners really need to know in order to be successful across time. Owners have to get clear about their return goals. So we have financial return goals, but what are the other return goals that we have in terms of growth, reinvestment in the community, the values we operate under, you know, for instance, one family that's a member of the center has chosen not to do business in countries where you have to give bribes or payoffs in order to be successful on the business side. So that's a values-based decision about how we're going to operate our business. So ownership needs to be clear about both the financial returns and non-financial returns as a business. And we have to understand what our generational time horizon is. Are we focusing on developing the next generation? Are we going to harvest this business at some point? What's going to be the unifying factor for our family across time? Next slide, please. So all of this leads us to the core part of our discussion today, which is what do our family members need to know in order to pursue family excellence, pursue ownership excellence, to develop this family strategy, to be constructive contributors to the family strategy development process. And we've identified 6 areas that we believe effective shareholders will have to have a basic understanding of in order to be a constructive contributor, whether they're inside the family business working for the family business or outside the family business as an owner. And these areas are finance, strategy, managing relationships, governance, leadership, and managing transitions. We'll go into some depth. And it's important to realize that these 6 areas are interdependent and influence each other, so they're not existing in isolation. That family members have to be developing themselves in each of these areas because each of these areas influence each other and are interconnected. So we'll review now some of the basic things that we think shareholders need to know in each of these areas. Next slide, please. So in terms of finance, when we meet with family members, probably the most common knowledge deficit that we encounter is in this area is this sense of financial knowledge. It's critical for family members to have a basic understanding of the financial reports that they'll see as owners, as well as the financial drivers of their companies and even their industries. This is what they need to know in order to make educated decisions as a shareholder about the relative health of their business and what's happening. And without this understanding, it'll be difficult to have the conversations that we need to have to build that sense of unity and that clear sense of direction for the business and the financial expectations of the business. Without understanding finance, family members often will assume the worst. They'll remember, one of the kind of core rules is that when there's a lack of information or a lack of understanding, it's more likely that emotions are going to push the conversation, and we'll invent a story that's far worse than the actual story in the family. So building this understanding of finance starts with basic terminology. So understanding what is a balance sheet, a cash flow statement, an income statement, contribution margins, capital expenditures, understanding the terminology of the financial world, ratios. So financial ratios often can give family members a quick snapshot of the business: return on equity, return on assets, debt to equity ratios. These are all ratios that can help family members understand different components of the financial health of their business, and looking at them over time can help to establish trends and an understanding of what's really happening in the business. They need to understand basic estate planning and the impact that estate taxes have on a family business as it tries to move from one generation to the next. If we don't understand this impact, and I think one of the difficult things for larger families is understanding the interdependence of each other's estate plans and the burden that can be put on the business or the rest of the family if we don't do our own estate planning because of the tax liability that it creates. We think that family members really have to have a basic understanding of trust and trusteeship. These are often the outgrowth of most estate plans, and most families have some sort of a group of trusts, often many trusts that are working together. And if family members don't understand the impact of this and how trusts operate, often we create a lot of tension in the family that is unnecessary. And if you want specifics, more specifics on understanding trusts and trusteeships, we had a webinar a few weeks ago that you can request a recording of that talks about the origin of trusts and the basic rules of trusts and trusteeship that will really help deepen that understanding. Family members have to understand that there's a finite relationship between growth, payout, and reinvestment, that if we want to continue our growth rate and increase the payout to shareholders, we're going to have to decrease our reinvestment unless we take on more debt, which increases the riskiness of our company. And ultimately, that equation is a critical thing for a family to have a conversation about. Valuation. We need to have a basic understanding of lack of marketability discounts, minority discounts, how valuations are typically formatted and created, how much of it is art and how much of it is science, because a valuation for estate planning purposes is often going to be very different than an evaluation for sale purposes. And understanding the different levers and compromises that get made in that process is critical. Next slide, please. The next area that we think is really critical for family shareholders to understand is strategy, and obviously strategy is deeply tied to the financials of the company in that risk-reward payout reinvestment equation that I just referenced. But shareholders need to have a basic understanding of the industry that our company exists within. What are the forces that are impacting that industry? How is our company performing in relation to that industry? And how do I understand the strategy that our management team is seeking to pursue? And what is our strategy on the family side? What is our strategy on the business side? So in the context of this, we need to understand the importance of the values, the vision, the mission that I talked about before, and look at trying to make sure and assess how unified and cohesive our family is about what we're trying to do based on these values. Family shareholders need to understand some of the basics of strategic planning and strategic process. How are we as a business looking at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats facing our business, and what is our management strategy and our positioning in the marketplace, and how do we think about that in terms of positioning ourselves for success across the long term. Knowing competitors, understanding the impact of industry changes, all of these things are really important. So one of the families that I work with actually has taken case studies of other businesses that are in their marketplace and had the family dissect the strengths and weaknesses and what strategies they thought those companies were pursuing after kind of understanding some basic strategy frameworks. So engaging the family as an ownership group and thinking strategically about the health, well-being, and future of the business. And all of that's to say that you need to understand that. You also need to understand the owner's role in strategy, that the owner's role is to choose the broad parameters of what businesses we want to be in, and broadly what kind of financial expectations and risk profiles do we have as a family. The ownership's role is not to craft this business strategy. That's the role of management. Family members have to understand the role there. Next slide, please. Families really need to spend some time with family members, helping them understand the role of a shareholder, that line that I was talking about, that it's not running the day-to-day company. That's the management's role, and the board is legally responsible for holding management accountable for pursuing a mission and vision that achieves the goals of the shareholders. So we need to help family members understand that we can accomplish more when we stay together and have a focus on the future than we can if we are focused on dividing and representing our branch interests or our individual interests rather than the interests of the whole. The more unified we are on our values, our mission, and our vision, the faster we can move and do things that our competitors can't. So that sense of family unity is critically important, and helping every family member understand their role in contributing to that family unity is critical. So, and for those family members to really understand, what are the structures of the business and family governance? What's the role of the board? What's the role of the family council? Why do we have family meetings? What goes into productive family meetings, family councils, etc.? In essence, how do we set common expectations for what it means to engage with this family business? How do we develop that sense of fairness and that we're all part of one team rather than emphasizing the divisions between families? So getting a real deep understanding of governance, I think, is important for the families and shareholders to be productive contributors across time. Next slide, please. So I think in the family business context, we most often think about leadership from the context of the leadership of the company. But in my experience with almost 20 years of working with families, is that we need different types of leadership at different times and in different ways to be successful across time. So leadership in the family may look very different than leadership in the business, and the people who are great business leaders may not necessarily be great family leaders. They may not have some of the interpersonal skills to be successful in that family or that ownership role in terms of bringing people together and developing that sense of unity. They may be brilliant business people and leading on that side of the equation. So the reality is that families are most likely going to need a lot of different types of leaders at different times. So we need to be looking at how are we cultivating leadership in the family, how are we cultivating leadership in the business, and how are we contributing to build ownership, leadership in the ownership group as well. Understanding different leadership styles, when are different leadership styles effective, and who has the skill sets that might help us take on specific problems. And that means that leadership may shift across generations, that the leadership style of one generation may be very different from the leadership style of another generation. I think if you look at the meta research data in business, I think you're seeing a shift that the greatest generation, a generation that grew up very connected to the military world of World War II, and often many of them were involved in the service, really grew up with a command and control mentality. And if you look at the data, I think you're starting to see a shift to a more collaborative and engaged leadership style where rather than being all command and control, leaders are starting to engage groups in decision making and realizing when is group decision making really important and when do you need that command and control mentality. That the different leadership styles have their time and place, but there's overall been more of a shift to collaborative leadership. Of course, with leadership, you have to also have followers and understanding what's the virtue in being a follower and making the conscious choice to be a follower. Next slide, please. The core of a lot of this is that we need to understand some of the basics of family communication or human communication. How do we manage our relationships with each other as family members? We often kind of think that as families we're supposed to inherently know how to get along with each other, and really doing a deep dive into how to manage relationships is important. So understanding the basic patterns and family dynamics that show up in families, understanding which are operating in our family and when are they productive or destructive to getting ourselves on the same page for developing unity. A lot of times the conflict that comes up in a family business is really based on our personality and communication styles more than family dynamics. So understanding the differences that somebody who's an engineer might have a certain style of giving and receiving information, whereas somebody who is an artist might have a very different style in communication in terms of giving and receiving information. You know, the essence of all communication is really that somebody is self-confident and has a sense of trust in the person that they're communicating with. So this is one of the reasons it's important for all family members to be looking at how can I help build the self-confidence of everybody in the family, because if everybody has their act together more effectively, we're going to be able to communicate more effectively. We can learn conflict management strategies, so family members have to understand self-regulation and how to manage their own emotions so that they can have productive conversations. Understand that there are generational differences. Many of you may have come to our April program that really looked at the differences in the millennial generation to Generation X to the greatest generation, all of those generational differences that influence how we look at problems and issues. Understanding the impact of our individual family history. Every family has a story, and the context of how we approach issues is inextricably connected to our family history and how our family has experienced issues across time. And we have to understand that governance is a tool to help manage these relationships across time. Next slide, please. And finally, next slide. Finally, all of this kind of fits together in this concept of managing transitions. So the communication, the governance, the strategy, the finance, they all interact in interplay across transitions. And family members need to understand the personal life transitions that they're going through or will be going through, whether that be having kids, getting married, whether that be retiring, stepping back, dealing with personal illness. All of those transitions influence family communication, and really kind of trying to identify what's normal and not normal is important. Understanding when ownership transitions are going to happen and how are we going to manage that. Leadership transitions in the business and the family. Sometimes when the trusted family leader dies, it really shifts the family conversation and family emotion. We also have to look at how are we preparing the next generation in the different types of leadership, both business and family leadership. How are we preparing that leadership so that we can manage the transition and look at the basic strategies that other families have employed in trying to manage these transitions. So all of this is to say that there's a lot of work and time and energy that needs to go into preparing family shareholders and making sure that they're ready to engage and be effective in supporting the growth development of both the family and the business. So that leaves us with kind of the question of how do we start to teach our families some of these things. There are a lot of different ways, and if we'll go to the next slide, I'll talk about one such way, which is our Family Business Stewardship Institute, which covers each of these 6 areas that we've talked about, which is managing relationships, governance, leadership, finance, strategy, and managing transitions, and developing that comprehensive family strategy. That's one kind of way that you can start to develop an understanding in your family shareholders about what they need to know. And we've had everybody from a CEO to just a normal everyday shareholder go through this program, and they all walk out of it with a really meaningful sense of stewardship and what they can do to help their families and business succeed into the next generation. Next slide, please. Other ways that families use to educate family members, they will do modules within their family meetings on any number of the topics that we've talked about today, whether that be understanding that our financial statements, our financial performance of our business, or working through conflict and dealing with conflict. Family websites and discussion groups can often be an effective tool. Sometimes what families will do is after a board meeting, they'll have a conference call or a discussion group to talk about what are the important issues facing the company, and they'll do plant tours as a part of a family meeting. They'll tell their family stories. One family had the next generation put on a play about the history of the family business, and the younger generation presented that story of history to the parents' generation, and it was a really dynamic piece. Another family has actually written a children's book about the founding of the company, and they're working on the second book, which will be kind of the story of how the second generation grew the business, so that every child when they're born will get a copy of that book. But sharing those family stories and those family histories can be really important. Getting family members engaged in convention and industry events, inviting them to the big conventions that your company goes to. All of those things can help build some of the things that we've talked about that family shareholders need to know. Next slide. So I'd like to close the formal portion of my presentation by just highlighting, if you want to engage in more discussion about this topic, we're having what we're calling the Breakfast of Family Business Champions. So one of the things that happens whenever we get family leaders into a room is a lot of them feel kind of like lone wolves, and they're really championing the family unity piece in their families. So we're having a breakfast on Wednesday, June 4th, that's next week, to go into deeper discussion about what families are doing in order to build success across generations and educate their family members about the things that we've talked about today. So I'll shift into taking some questions. The first question that came across was, how long does this educational process take? And I'd like to say that there's a magical moment where you're done, but I think that the most skilled families at this are realizing that there's always something that they can learn, so that even if they're very well developed on the side of board of directors, that they still devote more time and energy to getting better and better at that. So I would say, again, what we're trying to do here is build a practice of developing education and continually educating family members rather than a one-time event. That said, I think the basic level of understanding can be accomplished in a family. You say your family's 10 to 15 people that you're trying to educate, that you can do that over the course of 2 to 3 years and get a basic understanding of family business education. But keep in mind that each of the topics that we've talked about, finance, strategy, managing relationships, they're all going to have a different context based on where you are in your life at the time when you encounter those. So we may encounter the same content when we're in our 20s, but we hear it very differently in our 30s because of where we are in our life stage and our development, which is why kind of developing this practice of continuing learning is something that we think is really important. Another question that came in, what's the biggest educational hurdle that most families struggle to overcome? Well, I'd say the biggest deficit is usually the financial question in terms of family members really understanding numbers, because obviously not everybody in the family is going to be a numbers person. But I think probably the more difficult hurdle that most families struggle is, how do we develop good communication and conflict resolution skills? I think everybody in human relationships has to deal with conflict rather than, the more we can embrace and engage in constructive conflict rather than destructive conflict, the better off we're going to be. That we will end up building trust and unity by being able to resolve conflicts effectively. So really looking at how do we set the context and the ability for families to look at conflict, develop conflict management skills. Part of that is self-reflection and self-assessment, understanding what are my hot buttons, what's my personality style, how does that fit in the context of my business, who are the people who set me off, who are the people who I naturally align with. All of that kind of fits into a macro equation. So we have our individual approaches to conflict and communication that fits into a family dynamic, and how do we engage in our family. And one of the hurdles that most family members face in that is that they're always trying to change the other person. And the experience that I have had in working with families for a long, long time is that you can't change other people, you can only change yourself. And that if you do change yourself in the way that you engage with the family, that you will shift the patterns in the family, because the family cannot interact in the same way because you're acting in a different way. So any change you make in yourself will make a shift in the life of the family. So putting time and effort into managing yourself and dealing with what you can control is a great place for families to start. So there was a question about finance, and does everybody have to be a financial expert? And the answer is no. Again, understanding finance and reading financial statements takes place over time. You're not going to go to one seminar and be able to instantly understand the intricacies of a balance sheet, an income statement, cash flow. You're not going to understand all of that in one fell swoop. You have to continue to engage with it across time. And as your knowledge grows, you'll pick up more and more nuances. And I'll throw out another concept here that some of you may have heard me use before, which is that transparency builds trust, secrecy destroys trust. So the fear is usually that if we share information, people aren't going to be responsible with that information, and that we're going to lose control over that information. So if we prepare our shareholders and educate them effectively about all of the things we've talked about in here, they're going to understand that sense of responsibility that comes with receiving information, and they'll use that information responsibly. Another question came in about business strategy. So again, I think the general question is at what level of depth are we talking in terms of business strategy? And we're not necessarily talking that everybody is going to be a master strategist, but we want to know what the basic strategies are that typically businesses would employ, and how that relates to what we're trying. How does what we're doing relate to what others in the industry are doing, and how do we make sure that our management team has a sound strategy, and that if there's a lot of consolidation going on in our industry, what's our strategy to deal with that? If our products are getting commoditized, how do people typically deal with that? How do we manage those things? So how can it really helps us as owners and shareholders engage in a more positive discussion with the management team, and helps us better assess how our management team is doing as we understand the basics of business strategy. So one of the great things about the Stewardship Institute that I mentioned a little bit earlier is that over the course of 18 months, you have 6 2.5-day modules where you get to talk about each of these issues in a lot of depth, and hear how other families are dealing with those issues, and how they're seeing their family strategy and their business strategy. So you learn at a very deep level about each of these topics that we've talked about. So I think that's it for the questions, but really appreciate everybody's engagement and participation today. If you have questions afterwards, you can feel free to email me at akeyt@luc.edu. That's akeyt@luc.edu. We hope those of you who want to go into a deeper discussion of this will join us for our Breakfast of Family Business Champions next Wednesday, June 4th, from 8:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. here at the downtown campus in downtown Chicago. You can register by emailing Ann Smart at asmart@luc.edu, or calling her at 915-7738. So thanks for your engagement and participation today, and if you'd like to have one-on-one conversations with any member of our team, please give us a call at 312-915-6490, and we'll help you think about these things. All right, thanks very much, and hope to see you all soon.